Well, there's a few news articles that people might want to know about. This one, Acropolis, is a cryptocurrency service, and somebody managed to hack it. This sounds a lot like the way they took down the Digital Autonomous Organization, DAO, on Ethereum. They had some way to borrow money with some kind of process, and this had a flaw where you could borrow money speculating on it, and they were able to just borrow the money and take it away. They often have flaws like this, so that's $2 million stolen there, which is one of the smaller cryptocurrency hacks. The entire nation of North Korea is largely funded by cryptocurrency they steal this way. They steal much larger amounts than that. So everyone is watching to see what in the world is going on with the United States government and Trump refusing to concede. And there are a lot of interesting stories here. One interesting story is that the Democrats really did not win as much as they wanted. They didn't even win among Black people or Hispanics. That's why it is not as simple at all as the Democratic Party line has said, that they're the ones that represent the poor people and minorities, and the right is all just bigots and oppressing them. It's not that simple at all. And this is one of the things, this is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, because after the Democrats lost a bunch of seats, the mainstream Democrats started claiming it was all her fault and the squad's fault for being too liberal. And she defended herself very fiercely, saying, all of us won who were running on these extreme liberal positions. You guys lost because you didn't run a good campaign, because you're still dinosaurs and you don't use the internet. And this is strongly on that side. This guy went as a reporter to cover Florida in 2018, and he decided to go to Democratic events and Republican events. And the Republican events were well organized. They had well-staffed agencies in each city. You could call them and they'd immediately interview you and tell you where a rally was, and you could go there and find it. And the Democrats were just idiots. They would send you to the wrong address. There'd be nobody there. Everybody there wouldn't know anything. They wouldn't have any up-to-date schedule of events. Anyway, this is what I've heard. The Democrats ran a terrible campaign, and they say you can see it. I've been hearing, and again, the Million Mega March going on right now. I was reading about it. The right is organized. These guys are showing up the day before in clubs and caravans and organizing groups online. They really like to form these big rallies and march around and have the flags and all the selling the t-shirts and everything. They're really very organized to promote their cause. And the Democrats are very disorganized. That's why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, can't get people to pay attention to using modern tools. And I feel a lot like it's the same with my group of college teachers. We're largely trying to use modern techniques to teach students, and there's a whole bunch of older teachers that just don't want to do anything new. Anyway, so Trump is trying to claim he won. He seems, and I think the evidence is he's finally beginning to give up on this and accept it. And people are trying to figure out why he pretended he was still going to win. The most convincing argument I've heard is that the whole point of this is to exploit his followers for more money, because he's badly in debt and his campaign is badly in debt. And he's hoping to trick his followers into donating money so he can pay his debts. Anyway, he opened a hotline where you could call and report instances of voter fraud, but are getting almost no actual reports of voter fraud. All they're getting is liberals calling them to mock them and insult them and tell them jokes and stuff, and insult them and play fart sounds over the phone and everything else. So it's kind of hilarious, and they just shut that down yesterday or the day before. They just gave up on this voter fraud line. One of the states, I think Texas, offered $1 million reward for anybody who had evidence of voter fraud. And people called him with a few cases of real voter fraud, but it was all people fraudulently voting for Trump, and he doesn't want to pay for that. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, the lawsuits are ridiculous. They're sending lawyers that will go into court with no evidence at all, without even an assertion, not even a claim that anything illegal went on. And they're just getting thrown out of court. And, beginning to reach the point where they might, people are beginning to wonder why they are not getting sanctioned for frivolous lawsuits. You can't just waste the court's time and go in with stupid lawsuits with no basis at all. They can punish you for that. And it's beginning to look like they really ought to punish him, because they've got no case at all. And he's got, all the major law firms have quit and refused to have anything to do with the Trump campaign, because this will just make you look like a fool to go into court with nothing. And so he's got a bunch of third-rate hacks, and Rudolph Giuliani, who just seems to be a clueless drunk, running these lawsuits which have no basis. Of course, you know, I think in Trump's normal business, a lawsuit with no basis is perfectly fine. And this is true of a lot of corporations. They just take you to court, make you waste your time in court, make you pay for a lawyer, and a lot of people will just give up, even if you have no grounds for that suit at all. This is what Microsoft did to Linux. For a couple of decades, until about 8 or 10 years ago, Microsoft really wanted to prevent people from using Linux. So they made a completely baseless claim that they owned Linux because they purchased a company called SCO. And they sent lawyers to court to just string it along, always make another motion, make another delay, just keep it in the courts so it was never resolved. So then they could tell everybody, oh, if you use Linux, there's this threat hanging over you that maybe these court cases will mean you have to pay some kind of licensing fees because you don't really have the right to use that Linux, so you better get Windows. You know, this is the kind of thing you do. You can accomplish a lot of good for a business if you're much bigger than the person you're punching, and just by dragging it out in the court. Anyway, this is interesting. The Koch brothers, I've heard of for all my life as being the billionaires that fund all the right-wing stuff. And this guy has apparently changed his mind. Charles Koch says, you know, he'd been supporting the Republicans and the right all this time, and now he's beginning to feel like that wasn't a good idea. They didn't really accomplish his goals. He really wanted to make like a better society and take care of people, and he doesn't like where they went, which, you know, I think this is one thing I've seen. All the intellectual and sort of established conservative figures are pretty much leaving the Republican Party now because what they've done is just intolerable. They've totally betrayed all the values that they used to have. But the young Republicans really love this, like 80 or 90% of them. I have a different screen on share? Oh, let me see. Thank you for telling me. No, it says desktops. Well, maybe let's see if I can identify the desktops. Maybe I had to restart my machine. Ah, thank you for telling me. Okay, good. Anyway, anyway, that's Charles Koch, and he regrets it. We'll see what comes of all this. But I mean, I heard a good analysis of why the Republicans are all supporting Trump's completely baseless claim that he won the election. They said the Republican lawmakers are afraid of their base because 80 or 90% of the Republican voters love Trump, and the lawmakers cannot understand why they love Trump, and they don't know what they want, and they don't know what to do. They can't see anything against Trump, or they'll get turned against by their own base. But I don't know how you can represent a base that seems to be nuts. I'd have that problem. I see a private message saying, "What do you think about the protest?" What protest? The Million MAGA March? It's the only one I know of what's going on with the Million MAGA March. I saw some reports from it. They say they really do have a lot of people. Probably not a million, but they really have a lot of people. Anyway, so this one was kind of amazing. The third largest TV manufacturer, and this thing is just horrible. It's like an example of everything you should never do with Android. It comes with opening ports, serving up all the files, opening default password, remote controls, and all sorts of crazy things. It's a rooted device with super user binaries all over the place. It's got debugging turned on. Really just amazing stuff. Just basically like the worst Internet of things you read about. That's just wide open, gives everybody remote control from everywhere with no password. All right. And Parler is where a lot of people are going, as the Twitter is now blocking Trump. And I thought this is interesting. This is very much like Maoist stuff. They're talking about how you should punish all the liberals and refuse to wear a mask everywhere and start killing leftists, start killing Democrats, news media, college professors, and millennials. You know, this is very much what tends to happen. I don't know how many of these people are actually going to get a gun and do this stuff, but they're talking about it. It's fairly common that they hate intellectuals. This one's pretty amazing. This thing is finally about to happen. They sent this space probe out to deflect an asteroid, to practice to see if they could actually deflect an asteroid that was going to hit the planet. And so this is going to zoom up and crash on the asteroid, and it's going to be enough of an impact to change the orbit of the asteroid. And they're testing to see if they can use this to deflect killer asteroids. So it's straight out of science fiction, but that's what they're doing. And so now Newsmax is apparently going to be the new alt-right news source. Fox has departed from this. Trump is really mad at Fox. Obviously, the Murdochs called him and said, stop supporting Trump. So Fox called states for Biden before other nations did. And in the daytime news, where they pretend to actually be a news agency, is like saying that Biden won and Trump lost, although the evening commentators are still saying the opposite. But they're certainly not unified in repeating everything Trump wants them to say, which is the way they used to be. And so Trump is trying to move people over to OANN and Parler. And obviously, there are many people offering him a deal. This would solve his financial problems if he just went back into TV and brought his family along. Somebody has, yeah, your computer isn't yours. Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that in the news thing too. Yeah, that's kind of fun, all that information about your views. Anyway, let me talk about the chapter stuff, and then we'll talk about other things. So we got, this is probably, I think, the last lecture. We're doing more of chapter 4 today. Next week, we have a guest. This is a pretty celebrated guy. He wrote these books on cryptocurrency. Yeah, so this is extra credit if you want to come to it. It'll be at this time because this is a convenient time in Britain. And then we only have one more class after that. And I don't think I'll offer any new material. I'll just talk about one of these political topics or something. I'll announce it, but that's, and then we just got the final exam coming. So some people haven't done their presentation yet. One person said they would do their presentation today. That would be fine. Anyway, so let's talk about this stuff, which is a little more technical today. All right, so we're down here, and it's security program operations, and then network protection, endpoint protection, and identity and access management. So your security management. For a long time, people would set up networks and have no security people. They didn't care about security. They didn't think it mattered. You know, maybe 20 years ago, most people thought they weren't going to get hacked. Now I think everybody's gotten over that. And so now they realize you need to have security everywhere in your company, and you're just developing your products in particular. It saves a lot of money to include security early in the development process. They say if you fix something early in the design, it is 10 times cheaper than fixing it after you've finished the design in quality control, and it's 100 times cheaper than fixing it after you've sold it and having to have product recalls and patches and all that. So it would be best to, right when you're first thinking about building a product and thinking about the things that we required to make that product, you should consider security at that time. Then the earlier the better. The later you think of it, the more likely you waste your time designing something that's going to have to be sort of undone and modified. All right, of course, this is a real problem because engineering classes don't teach security, computer science classes don't teach security. So it is not like the people doing the product development know how to make it secure. It's typically they have a team and they know how to make it with the right materials and cheap enough and fast enough and pretty enough. And then there's this external security agency criticizing them and telling them they're doing it all wrong. And it's not good because they just see them as a hostile drag to avoid. And the security people, since they're not really developers, they don't really know how to help people so much. So this is the thing that you hear so much in this class. You really have to develop a relationship of trust with the people you're trying to help so that you can actually help them be more secure instead of just being like a Dr. No telling them everything they're doing is wrong. That doesn't help anybody. You have to somehow steer them into less dangerous practices in some way that is acceptable to them. It doesn't ruin their productivity. All right, and so then we're down to network protection, things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and sniffers. So many layers of defenses. So firewalls are the famous one. The point of a firewall is you have the internet out here and there's a lot of traffic coming in. The firewall has some rules that will detect forbidden traffic and it will throw it away so that some of the bad stuff is removed and doesn't enter your other networks here. And you typically have layered defenses. This is the simplest, although you often have many more layers. City College has 100 VLANs. So you have one area that is relatively unfiltered. where everybody can get pretty easily. And that's where you put your DMZ network, where you put public things like your web server and your email server, which should not contain any private corporate data, but should be readily available to everyone on the internet. And then you have a more strict set of rules to get to your internal network, where you have your proprietary product designs and your customers' social security numbers and addresses and credit card numbers and stuff like that, where you really make sure that anybody going into this line actually has proven that they're an employee of the company and had a two-factor authentication VPN credential or something to give you some high degree of confidence that you're not letting bad guys in there. So firewall rules are often very simple, where you just have certain IP addresses and ports that are allowed and some that are denied. Almost nobody uses this stuff. They're describing first generation firewalls anymore. They almost all use layer 7 Palo Altos that have much more sophisticated rules, like social networks, games, pornography, live feed from a threat intelligence source of known malware domains to block, and that sort of thing. It's much more sophisticated than this, but it's logically similar. They just have a list of places to block. And then you have application firewalls, which deal with more than just denying all traffic to a server, scrubbing the traffic to let through the good traffic and block the bad traffic. So you're trying to block things like SQL injection. A SQL injection is where you go to a form, you fill in like your name and address, and you fill in your name and address with extra punctuation marks and commands, which are misunderstood by the server. So it's not like you're coming from a bad IP address or coming in on an unexpected port. You're sending valid data to the server to be processed, but that data contains a suspicious pattern of data of parameters. And so that's the sort of thing a web application firewall will try to block. And like I mentioned, the main thing you want to do is segment your network. It is considered highly unsafe to run a flat network, where once you come in the external firewall, you can just go everywhere. That is very unprofessional. You should have everything segmented. So the internet's out here, there's some firewall to get in at all. And once you're in, there's more firewalls and filters. So there's financial systems are in their own segment, the office over here, your product development here, your data centers and your payment systems are all separated. So that even if somebody manages to get somebody in like finance to run an email attachment and get infected, there are more barriers before they can get to the real goodies. That's the idea. So intrusion prevention systems analyze the traffic and compare it to known bad traffic, like an antivirus system, and let you know if it detects that this packet contains bad data, like a threat intel feed. They can block legitimate traffic, just like antivirus can remove legitimate files. So those are false positives. They have false positives and false negatives. False negatives are when they let bad traffic through, and false positives are when they block good traffic, and both kinds of failure do happen. Another thing you can do is network anomaly detection, where instead of working, can an IPS replace an application firewall? No, they're typically quite different. In principle, they all sound like they're doing the same thing, but in practice, they're designed differently. So an application firewall will have specific application attacks like injection, and typically an IPS focuses on malware. I remember when they first had antivirus, and then they had like unwanted software, whatever they call it, adware and all that, like 3 different products running on your machine, and it didn't really make much sense. These days, the integrated thing is called Endpoint Protection, which we'll get to. But yeah, typically an IPS is different than an application firewall. Now, they have tried for years to sell things called a unified threat gateway, which would be one box that would supposedly block all this stuff, but doesn't seem to be the case that most people have gone that way. Anyway, anomaly detection watches your traffic to try to learn what normal traffic is and then warn you if anything looks out of the ordinary. This is prone to false positives because network traffic is not very steady. People do a lot of different things. But anyway, you collect traffic from all these different parts of your network and then analyze it, and you have some kind of system here. People are now talking about using machine learning for this. And I think that's new, and I'm not sure how effective it is yet, but that's where a lot of people think this is going. You'll have a machine learning thing that learns what your normal network traffic looks like, and it learns to spot the bad stuff. Right now, that's largely up to humans. So what you have is you have an IPS like Suricata detecting the known attacks, and then you have humans working in a security operations center, analyzing the traffic with an SIEM system and such, and finding the things that were not caught by the intrusion prevention systems, and deciding whether how important the things, the alerts coming from that system are. So there are standards. Netflow is a way to monitor traffic. There's other protocols out here. These are ways to measure traffic and boil it down to a list, like this many bytes at this time with this protocol, so you can get some kind of summary of it and then look for things that are different. Like an unusual amount of traffic might indicate somebody downloading BitTorrent or an infected machine. Anyway, so you got to have devices to copy the traffic. You can have switches with span ports, which are switches that make an extra copy of every packet to go out of port, but that usually can't really keep up with a busy network's full line speed. At that point, you have to buy a special device called the network tap, which is a hardware device that just takes the traffic, passes it through, and sends another copy out of it, another port for analysis. So you can run a sniffer, which just collects all the traffic coming into a point, and that's used for a lot of things. Wireshark is the #1 tool for short-term sniffing or analyzing packet captures, but it's not safe enough to run Wireshark sniffing a live network. It's not a very secure program. What's better if you have long-term monitoring is to run a command line tool like TCP dump to gather all the traffic and save it in files, and then you use something like Wireshark to analyze those files later. Anyway, wireless networks are particularly a problem because they go outside the walls of your building. So you've got people connecting into your network potentially who are not even on the premises. And so that's why you use an authentication system, an encryption system like WPA or WPA2 and Radius, so that presumably they can't connect without authentic credentials. In the old days, they used a system called WEP. That's pretty much extinct now. It's very unsafe. Anybody can connect to a WEP network without the password. With any variety of hacking tools, they can quickly get in. The main risk these days, I think, is rogue access points. A lot of people, they don't have a good enough wireless signal in their office, so they just buy an access point, plug it in the wall, and that might just be set for no encryption or something like that. So one thing people do is go around and catch these with a laptop, or even turn on automated rogue access point suppression. Cisco will sell you devices with this, where it automatically detects any unapproved access point, and then it sends disassociation frames to kick everybody off that network so that you cannot plug in an unauthorized wireless point. So web content filter will block malicious websites, and you can block them by categories. Therefore, it's got to be inline. The inline device you could have at your company that would protect the whole company, but then if people are off campus, they won't have it. The other thing you could do is stick an agent on every laptop, every endpoint that filters the traffic there, and then they wouldn't be able to get to this traffic on their work machine no matter where they go. Both of those have their advantages. There are cloud access security brokers. This is a really big issue. I had a student that worked at a company that got hacked because they had all these cloud services, and people were coming in from all over the place, getting into their important stuff from cloud services. So you're using Dropbox and GitHub and all kinds of things out there. And so a cloud access security broker will be a place where you can limit what sites you're allowed to use. Once a hacker has exploited WEP, will they be detected? Well, they would be just like, they're on the network now. So they would be like if someone came into the company and plugged in the wall with a cable, there's another user on the network. Now, it's possible that you would detect that, but in practice, I think almost nobody would. They probably won't detect you until you do something bad, like download malware or use up a lot of bandwidth or something. It's a big issue. There's a thing in Cisco called sticky ports that people use sometimes, where you only let a specific machine connect to each port, that sort of thing. That's why these authentication protocols like WPA and WPA Enterprise are there, to make sure that when you connect, you have to prove that you're really an employee in order to get in. That's the point. And in the old days, they did it by MAC address, where you would plug in as a cable, and if you brought in a laptop and plugged in the cable, it would recognize that you're not the same machine, you couldn't get on. But that was a pretty weak defense. WPA is actually pretty good if you implement it correctly. People aren't going to get in unless they manage to steal credentials, which is why people don't usually get in that way. The usual way they get in is by phishing. They send email to everybody and somebody clicks on the link and runs the software. That's the usual way you get in. So this is a big issue. A lot of people protect their network by monitoring DNS. So they find out every server you're connecting to from every machine, and then they can easily find out who is like infected and going to a known malicious source, or who's playing games at work or whatever. But now everyone is switching to encrypted DNS, so this will not be so easy to do anymore. That's why a lot of people are real upset about encrypting DNS, just like a lot of law enforcement agencies are upset about encrypting instant messages and stuff. They got used to using this unencrypted content as an easy way to monitor what everybody was doing. There is a way to do it without violating the encryption, which is you run your own DNS server. They send encrypted traffic to that, and you have the key so you can decrypt it there and examine it, and then you do not let anybody use anything else but the official company DNS server. That is a better way to continue to use DNS to protect the network while not preventing people from using encrypted DNS requests. Anyway, then you got email, of course. Like I say, this is the most common way to get in because everybody gets email all day and it's all full of junk, and a lot of people will open things. So you can target the executives with messages specifically written to interest them. And it carries all sorts of malware, ransomware, or anything else, crypto miners. Is encrypted DNS HTTPS? Yes, that's the most common type. There are some other techniques, but the one that seems to be the popular one is DOE, called DNS over HTTPS. That's what's used by, I think now Firefox uses it by default, and more products are switching to that. So now all your DNS queries are encrypted and people can no longer monitor them easily. So you got email, and you'd like to block that bad email. So there are these spam filters that look for particular words in the email, and those are extremely ineffective. But they continue to go. One of the better ones is Postini, which Google bought and built into Gmail, where if people mark the email as spam, they notice, and if like a certain number of people mark it spam, then they take it out of everybody else's inbox. So they use crowdsourcing to detect the spam. That's pretty good. Although in practice, none of them are very good. There's a ton of money in spam. There's a whole bunch of organized crime figures that are living in luxury and have whole gangs like spam. It's making money like betting on illegal betting on sports or something. So they vigorously come up with more and more spam campaigns very quickly that get through whatever filters you got. So I think everybody has a problem with spam, and it never seems to go away. Anyway, another thing that often happens is your emails go to a quarantine because you typically have good email thrown away too. So your users can go into the trash can and recover emails, and that's how a lot of companies have got infected. It is a serious problem, and you can have known trusted senders and known untrusted senders and so on, but it's all working very badly, just sort of like the telephone. I must get 6 or 8, I don't know, maybe it's only 3. I get a lot of calls, spam phone calls every day. It's the same thing, robocalls. We don't have very effective ways of stopping it on email or the telephone yet. And so you can copy a legitimate email. You can send phishing messages over SMS. You can specifically craft the messages to interest your target by doing some research first. You can target chief executives, where you target one specific person, and then the best thing is to do even more research to where you have something of interest to that person. Like you find out who their dentist is, and then you send a message saying, "I'm your dentist. I want to talk to you about your next appointment," or something. I'm changing. Something like that, something that really looks customized to them so they'll believe it's real, and then they'll open the attachment or click on the link. So a lot of people test their own employees. Their security team will send phishing emails to the employees just to see if they click on it, and then you can send them for more training or give them a prize if they report it and don't click on it or something like that, in order to increase awareness of phishing and security about it. Then there's network access control. This will only allow certain devices to connect. Only company issued laptops, only devices with the up-to-date patches and anti-malware, or so on. Some colleges do this, and one great problem I hear is they'll turn on network access control. It requires you to prove that you have like McAfee antivirus, but if you're running Linux, you can't have McAfee antivirus. And so people get hacking tools that will pretend to be Windows. The Russian spam cartels who left a bullet after they killed a competitor. I'm not sure about the bullet, but yeah, they certainly do. Yeah, I mean, that's common. I mean, that's in Spam Kings, I think. I mean, the people who make this spam are just like mafia dons, and they fight among themselves. They kidnap each other's families. They kill each other for the money. You know, it's just like the head of a drug cartel. Yeah. Anyway, let's take a look at the cahoots 4E. 4E1 should be here. And there it is. That's why I was surprised, but I heard people say that if you take over a machine, the most valuable thing you can do with it to turn it into money is to send spam from it. Although I think these days ransomware, it might be the most valuable thing you can do with it, is encrypt all the company files and then demand a ransom. For a while, people tried to make money by using the processor to mine cryptocurrencies, and I don't think that's working very well. I don't think you make enough money that way to compare with these other scams. But you know, one thing I used to hear a lot is people would say, you know, I don't have to worry because who would want to take over my machine anyway? There's nothing much on there. And it turns out there are ways to make money from just taking over somebody's machine. The simplest being use your email account and send spam. All right, looks pretty good. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. All right, the semi-trusted network. Okay, that's the DMZ, good. Demilitarized zone is the same thing in military terms. You have a area between two armies where there are snipers and landmines and stuff. So anybody that goes out there is not allowed to be a combatant or you'll shoot them. Anyway. All right. What device will stop SQL injection? Yeah, it is an application firewall. It was a good question someone asked, you know, why isn't it just an IPS? I don't really know why, but it turns out that they prefer to have a specialized device just for this sort of thing. All right, what system will block categories of web pages like games? Yep, a web content filter. The name is pretty descriptive. All right. And which one will limit access to unwanted cloud services? Your cloud access security broker. All right. All right. All right. I know who that is. And that I don't know. Okay, I see. Okay. Fair enough. Good. So, all right, let's take a look at the rest of this. All right. So then you got endpoint protection is the modern solution. So endpoints are whatever people are using to browse the internet and do their work, typically a laptop or a desktop computer. And used to just run antivirus on it and call it a day, but that is not good enough anymore. It doesn't stop the attack. So they have this improved stuff called endpoint protection. So your laptops have all sorts of problems. That's where people are clicking on links and getting infected. They often have copies of company data on them and such. And it's the most risky part because those users are surfing the web, clicking on links, and can easily get infected. So you try to control the risk of the endpoint. Now, image management is where they have a company laptop and it's a copy of a known golden image. This is why almost everybody works now. If you want to repair a machine, you'll typically just restore it to a known good image. If you buy a laptop, it often has a emergency restore mode that will just copy the image of the way it looked when it was brand new. And that's how companies do it. They'll just easily, restore it. And that image would include not only all the software and have no malware in it, it would also have all the security settings the way you want it. Then there's automated tools. This is the point of having a Windows domain controller. It forces you to have certain patches, have certain versions of software, block other software, and all that jazz. This is why Macintoshes are really a drag at the company, because Microsoft totally gives you the ability for your boss to really control your laptop. Limit what you do, limit what software goes on it, remove bad things, remotely wipe it when it's lost, and all that jazz. And Apple really doesn't provide that stuff. They really don't think about company devices when they design it. So you can have remote control, so your help desk can just take it over, remote wipe. You can have full disk encryption, so that if somebody steals the laptop, the data is inaccessible, they can remotely enforce full disk encryption and make sure that all the official company laptops are encrypted, what you'd want to do. And you got standards, so they'll have documents specifying your company's standard configuration for your endpoints and make sure that they have all your security policies in place. All right. And so malware prevention is a big one. In the old days, there were viruses that attached to executables or in the boot sector. These days, almost everything is worms that travel over networks. There are Trojans that lie about what they are. There are macros inside Microsoft Office documents, scripts that run. That was a really big deal around 2000. It still happens, though. Rootkits are malware that infect the very heart of the operating system, so it's very hard to detect and very hard to remove. That's typically for long-term control of a machine. And now they have memory-resident malware that never puts anything on the disk at all, and that makes it harder for antivirus to catch it. And as we know, ransomware is the big hot thing now, where once your machine is infected, it now encrypts all your files and it reaches out to your cloud services like Dropbox and encrypts all of them. And then it finds your backups and encrypts them. And then it connects to all your company shared folders and encrypts all that and spreads. So one guy clicks on a link, and by the end of the day, your entire company is down. And all the machines just show a ransom note saying, you got to pay us like 20 grand in Bitcoin. And for what I hear, everybody just pays the ransom. Almost nobody can say no. Even if it's a high ransom, it is such a disaster for your business that even if they have backups, they typically pay the ransom because it's easier than restoring from their backups. And now the bad guys will claim that they're going to leak the data unless you pay the ransom, and they'll even take out Facebook ads advertising that they have your data and you have like another 2 days to pay up and stuff. But what's the difference between hiding an OS than in memory? Well, the OS is on the hard drive. And when you write a file to the hard drive, you typically get caught, because antivirus for decades has known to check every time you write a file to the hard drive, they intercept that system call and they check that file to see if it's malware. But they don't necessarily do that very well for things in memory. For example, if you make a launcher, which we're doing in the malware analysis class, you can have a program which has another program hidden inside it as data. And your antivirus will typically not recognize that. And so it doesn't look like a virus, but when you run it, it allocates a region of memory, puts the data in there and runs it. So it ends up launching a malicious program, but it doesn't get caught by the antivirus. That's the point, memory resident stuff. Memory is the RAM. And the RAM is the temporary storage. When you turn off the power, it forgets. The hard drive is the part that remembers when the power goes off. That's where almost everything lives, therefore. So memory resident malware is only going to persist until you turn off the power, if that's all it is. It will have to have some other kind of launcher for persistence. All right, then there's machines that just destroy your machine, wipe out the hard drive or the files, things that put you under remote control, and keyloggers that steal your key presses. So the old way to do antivirus was to look for patterns of bytes. They would just have characteristic patterns to identify files. And that is very weak defense, because if you modify the malware, it won't match the signature anymore. But the good thing about it is it has almost no false positives. It will really detect malware. And when it says it's malware, it's really malware. How do you resist memory resident is not easy. You can do it with Heuristic detection, people try that where it just tries to find nasty looking activity. You can just scan activities in memory and look for suspicious patterns of API calls. It's a very good question. And the answer is it's not very effective to block memory resident malware. That's why people do it. In practice, what happens is it's really like how the cops resist like criminal gangs robbing stores. They just watch the attacks and they notice what techniques are popular, and then they write a custom rule to stop whatever technique is fashionable this week. And that's why network defenders subscribe to threat feeds and watch certain Twitter accounts and paste bin accounts, and people are constantly posting, I found an attack, here's what it looks like, add this to your list. That's the thing. It's pretty nasty. It's not a very automated or effective process right now. So anyway, that's what we're talking about here. You can look for suspicious behavior. And another thing you can do, which FireEye does, and there are other products, is it takes all your email. Before it delivers the email, it takes out the files and runs them in a little virtual machine in the cloud. And it notices it does something rotten in that machine that they can detect. And so that's sandboxing. That's one trick people do. And some antivirus products will do that too. That's why when I did this a few years ago, I wrote malware in Python and tried to sneak it past Norton Antivirus. And one guy told me, all you have to do is make your malware wait about 30 seconds before it does anything bad, because it doesn't run the sandbox machine for more than a few seconds. So if you just don't do anything bad in the first few seconds, you'll pass that test. Anyway, so here's ransomware protection that will scramble the memory map. And the idea is that it'll block malware attacks, because when it tries to launch itself into memory, it won't be able to do it. It sounds pretty good. I've seen anti-keylogger defenses, which is software that scrambles the signals that come from the keys, so that when your keylogger runs, it gets scrambled junk instead of the real key presses. Oh, well, you can, the sandbox we're talking about here is an automated sandbox run automatically by a tool like FireEye, which is expensive. So you don't do it yourself. If you want to do it yourself, then that's what the whole malware analysis class is. You set up a virtual machine, you run the malware, and you run a bunch of tools to monitor the operating system while you do it. And you can totally do that on a Mac, but typically the only malware you're worried about is Windows malware. In principle, there is some Mac malware, and there are some tools to find it, but they're not very mature, and I haven't used them much. I tried them a few times and they fouled up my Mac and I got fed up with them. But typically, if you want to make your own sandbox, you typically do it in a virtual machine, or you purchase a product that is like a cloud sandbox. And there's quite a few of those. There's like Joe's Sandbox and others. There are commercial products that will do it. Anyway, so antivirus is pretty much dying. It used to be up until 10 years ago that people felt like antivirus really protected you. Now people are pretty fed up with it. There are so many ways to sneak past antivirus. Pen testers do it all the time. People still run it because it will stop the lowest level attacker. This is sort of like an ordinary home lock. When I used to teach pen testing, I just show the students how to pick locks. The locks you buy at Home Depot for 10 bucks and put on your door, they're pretty miserable. Anybody can pick it in like 10 minutes with a lock pick. With practice, they can do it even faster. So that lock doesn't really stop people from coming in the door. It only stops the lowest, weakest attacker that really don't know anything. And that's what antivirus does. It stops the ridiculously low-level, unskilled attacks. And that's something, but it's not going to stop anybody, any kind of professional. All right, so another thing you do, which makes one big step, especially in the time of coronavirus, and the FireEye CEO that talked to us talked about this, is virtual desktop infrastructure, where I really don't feel comfortable with my employees using their home machine, their home laptop, having their kids play on it and all that garbage. So I'm going to just make them connect with remote desktop protocol to a cloud desktop that is totally in Azure, totally in the cloud. So company data is never on their machine. All they're doing is using their machine as a viewer to view a cloud desktop. And that's a pretty cool idea. And that's a lot of people do. Of course, then you pay for some cloud resources, but then it isn't that important what kind of garbagey machine they're using to connect to it. All right. You can, if you run enterprise class anti-malware, like the enterprise version of McAfee or Norton or something, then it will not only put an agent on every machine to scan for malware. It will have a central console that detects all the machines and whether they're detecting viruses and whether their stuff is up to date and all that. And you can run scans and change configurations from that central point. And that's what you have to do. You have to make sure that everybody really has it. City College had a scandal about 8 years ago that was largely fake, but the one part of this scandal that was true is we did not have this. We didn't have enterprise anti-malware. So there was a lab where people had about 20 old machines and they were running too slow, so they took the antivirus off them to make them run faster, and then they got infected. And if we had had this set up, we would have known that that happened, and we didn't have it at that time. So that's something you want. You want to know whether all your established machines are really using their antivirus properly. Anyway, in the old days of XP and earlier, everybody ran Windows as administrator all the time, and that's a really terrible practice because then every other process that is launched while you're surfing the web can install stuff. So now, in modern versions of Windows, you have user account controls, so you're not logged in as administrator all the time. You're a lower level user, and every time you have to install software or something, you have to click yes on a box that pops up. So it can't happen by accident without you approving it. That's the idea. That's a least privilege control that has been present in Linux for decades, but Microsoft has only been putting it in for maybe about the last 10 years. But all supported versions of the Microsoft operating system have that by default now, unless you turn it off. So then there's identity and access management. There was a long time ago when you would learn a password and use the same password everywhere, and that was fine. Now that's really not fine. And so you really should have a separate password for every app. So what everybody should really do is learn to use a password manager. Anyway, now, and I learned to use one a few years ago, and boy, it's better. Anyway, but now you have not only your machine, you've got Dropbox and Amazon and all these services you're logging into. So you drive yourself nuts with all these passwords. And the right answer is use password manager for you, but for your company, you should have single sign-on. And that's where you sign into one company box, like your domain controller, and it then has an ability to transfer your identity to other machines. So when you connect to some cloud service, your domain controller sends a ticket to the cloud service saying, I already know who this guy is. They don't need to give you a password. You can trust me. And this is called federated identity management. When some other company trusts your identity provider to know who somebody is. And this is happening all over the web. If you go to a website and they say, log in with Facebook, that makes Facebook the repository of your password and your identity, and everybody else doesn't have you prove your identity to them. They have you keep proving your identity to Facebook, and then Facebook will vouch for you. Oh, I already figured out who this guy is. You don't have to ask them for a password. That's what it's like. And that's the point. This makes it much more practical for people to do this. Yeah, iCloud is a common password manager. As far as I know, it's fine. And the good thing about iCloud, of course, is you don't have to type your password in on all your different devices. And if you lose your device, you don't lose your stuff. So I think a lot of people do that. As far as I know, iCloud is fine. I'm using 1Password, I think, or something like that, LastPass, but it's just because it was around earlier. Of course, the one thing about iCloud is I don't think it'll move your password to Windows machines, will it? That's the thing. If you get these third-party devices, third-party ones are compatible with different operating systems and stuff. But yeah, you should have your password stored in a password manager, and that password manager should be in the cloud. So if you lose your device, you don't lose your passwords. And that way you greatly improve your security because I really have a different password at every place. You manually type them from iCloud to Windows. Yeah, that's the problem. If you use something like LastPass, you can get around that. Anyway, so by the way, another thing is you shouldn't have single-factor authentication anymore. Anyway, for anything important, you should have two-factor authentication where you need not only the password, but some second factor. Like, for example, noticing from your IP address that you really are using your home machine. That's an easy factor. It isn't as pain. Other things are these SMS messages or phone calls, which are not very secure, but they're better than no two-factor at all. The best thing is something like a hardware USB key or Google Authenticator app that generates the other part of it. But definitely two-factor authentication is much better because however you handle passwords, they tend to get stolen pretty often. Anyway, so you've got a lot of things to do now that you're maintaining, you figure out who people are, you have to give new workers their credentials, you have to adjust their access rights as they move around, you have to lock people out for various reasons and cancel all their access when they leave the company. So that's quite a lot of routine management of access. Then you've got bringing in new business partners. You now have to add them to your federated identity management and deal with lost devices. You know, it really is quite a job to keep on top of all this. So you've got, then you have to watch to see if people are abusing their privileges. So review their access. Segregation of duties means that two people have to work together to confirm an important activity. One person can't do it alone. And then you have to audit your privileged attacks. It should be E anyway. These are people who have administrator rights. They might be creating more administrator accounts or doing something. And since they have so much power, you can't stop them from doing stuff with access rules. So you have to audit what they have been doing. That's the only way you can tell if they've been doing something they shouldn't be doing. All right. And so access reviews make sure that people have the right amount of access. What tends to happen is accumulation of privilege. People move from job to job and they just keep giving them more and more and more access to more systems, and they don't take away the old systems, because typically, you know, if you move from one job role to another, they'll call you next week and say, hey, we're having a problem with this, can you fix it? And if you've lost access to the old systems, you can't do that. So it is in practice difficult to cancel your old rights when you move to the new system. This is what tends to lead to accumulation. We talked about segregation of duties, where a single person can't do something too important all alone. That must also be approved by a second person, or a step in the process has to be done by a second person. So there's access review is another way to do it here, where you check to make sure that you watch to see what people are doing, and account your privileges. Watch what the highly privileged people are doing. And in general, you have to watch what everybody's doing. Watch to see if accounts that have been inactive are coming back in. That's pretty common. An attacker will somehow find like a password dump of somebody or company that got hacked, and people are reusing passwords because they're not using a good password manager. And then they'll try to log in, and they'll find somebody who's like been on vacation for 6 months and use their account and come in. That's the kind of thing that tends to happen. So you could pick that up if you notice, by auditing accounts that somebody is logging in that shouldn't really be logging in. So recertification is here, where you try to determine whether access is still required. This is like when they purge voter rolls. They notice who no longer needs credentials and take them off. User behavior analytics is all the rage. You monitor the network and you watch what people do, and you try to determine if they're acting suspicious. Now, this is what credit cards use. The American credit card system, until recently, didn't have any chip in the card, so you would use the same number for every transaction. So everywhere you used your card, anybody could just keep taking more money forever. It was ridiculous, and all the security was on the server side. So they have a very good system for people that are experts in game theory detecting suspicious transactions, and that's what this does. Somehow you detect suspicious activities. That's the idea. There's a lot of this stuff for sale. I'm not sure how effective it is, but that's the idea. It will notice if your users are acting suspicious, and that indicates that they might have a compromised machine or something. Anyway, and of course, the real desire there is to detect when they're disloyal, like Snowden. And that there are people who claim they will sell you that, but I'm suspicious that it doesn't work very well. Anyway, 4E is here, and now I'm in trouble. Favorites, I say. Well, I'm on 60, 4E2, there it was. There we go. There we are. I finally found the right button. Good. There's 5. I'll get a few more seconds. I think we had 5 last time. All right, I guess that's it. Which system will restore a laptop to working condition? It's image management. This is, of course, what I do with all my cloud servers. I have all these vulnerable servers. Students are hacking them. They trash them, and I restore them from an image. All right, so what happens in Office files? Those are macro viruses. Microsoft made the controversial decision to take a document and put a program inside it. And those are called macros, and they're a really common perennial form of malware that just keeps coming back and back. Microsoft adds defenses, and then they find another way to bring them back in. Every year or two, I hear another flood of macro Office viruses. All right, which anti-malware technique is old and weak? Signatures. That's the original technique and not very effective. All right, what process notices if an employee has begun to act strangely? User behavior analytics. All right. All right, that's VU. And I know who that is. And all right, fair enough. Good, so I've got those people, and I'll stop this, and I'll stop the recording and post it up.